the porters on the train used to come through, and when they'd get about a mile and a half a mile from Tulsa, they would come through the coaches and say, Tulsa, the next stop, Greenwood Battleground.
The African American population in Oklahoma was very autonomous. They had a certain kind of strength and sense of themselves. There were a number of really powerful, strong, and wealthy black communities, and of all of those, Greenwood, which is what the name of the black district in Tulsa was called, was the wealthiest.
It was called the Black Wall Street, and Black Wall Street was very, very important. They had movies, they had churches, they had banks, they had funeral homes, they had everything they needed.
In fact, not very long before the riot, W.E.B. Du Bois said that Tulsa, the black community in Tulsa, was the finest example of Negro self-sufficiency in the nation.
1921 was the era when black people were routinely lynched. The segregation was rampant.
The Greenwood property was very important to Tulsa's expansion across the railroad tracks, and there were white property owners who wanted that property.
In Tulsa, the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, had a strong presence in the 1920s. One of the first women's auxiliaries of the Klan was here.
If you were walking down the streets on the sidewalk, and you was walking south, and 2 or 3 whites were walking down the same street, and y'all had to pass each other. Well, you would have to get out in the street instead of walking down the sidewalk.
The spark that lit a match to all of those tensions was the arrest of a young black man for a quote-unquote assault on a white girl. And there'd been a lynching of a young white man here in Tulsa just 9 months prior to this event with Dick Rowland and the elevator operator whose name was Sarah Page. So there was a strong reason for the black community to believe that talk of lynching would go forward and that they would, in fact, lynch Dick Rowland. So a number of black citizens armed themselves and came downtown to the county courthouse to offer their services to the sheriff to prevent that lynching from taking place, and a gunfight broke out.
In a matter of hours, ignorance, fear, and hate dimmed the bright lights of hope that had shone for years. Daylight turned to dusk, dusk to darkness. Under cover of that darkness, all manner of unspeakable, unimaginable atrocities came to pass.
Some 10,000 whites just moved en masse across the railroad tracks and began to burn and loot and destroy all the buildings of this wealthy black community.
People were killed. People were fleeing their homes with their hands up, and they were shot.
My family and me, we had to get up and get out of the way of the mob that was burning down Tulsa, Black Tulsa. We had to leave our homes and leave. We didn't have time to stop and get nothing. We had to get what we had on our back.
The governor in Oklahoma City sent in the National Guard. And I don't know what would have ever stopped the rioters, but by then the destruction was complete.
My grandmother and grandfather, I don't have no remembrance of them, no pictures of them or anything, because all of that was destroyed during the race riot.
There was a real effort to minimize this 1921 Tulsa Race Riot, which after all had resulted in the deaths of, most people estimate, between 100 and 300 people, the destruction of more than 1,200 structures.
It was sort of a closed question with both the whites and the blacks. Nobody talked about it. I found out from the African American people later that this had never been discussed with their parents either, and so they didn't know anything about it. Nobody knew anything about it.
The porters on the train used to come through, and when they'd get about a mile and a half a mile from Tulsa, they would come through the coaches and say, Tulsa, the next stop, Greenwood Battleground.
It did rebuild, and it was vital again in the 1950s and the 1960s. And then in the 1970s, this program called Urban Renewal took place, in which they built a freeway really pretty much right through the heart of it. And that was pretty much the end of Greenwood in terms of it being the business district that it had ever been.
The Greenwood District is in the midst of a renaissance, but it is a renaissance of spirit, not of bricks and mortar. New hotels, cafes, and shops are not being built. Those businesses that exist still struggle to survive. Physically, the Greenwood District today pales in comparison to the same area in its prime. But the soul of the Greenwood District remains deeply embedded in its people.
This is T's Barbershop, 120 North Greenwood. There was a riot here, there was problems. I would have been embarrassed if I'd been the city management here and dropped a bomb on my own people. I would be too embarrassed to print it, wouldn't you? Hopefully one day we'll see a better looking area and hopefully business will pick up.
I think the white perspective regarding the riot quite largely was closed minds. They didn't want to hear about it. It's over. You know, what's over is things people say all the time when they don't want to face up to a situation. They'll say, oh, that's past history. They said that about the Holocaust. They say it about the riot. You know, that's past history. Just forget it. You can't forget it, because if you forget it, you'll do it again.
About a month before I actually scheduled interviews to start the documentary, I read books such as Black Wall Street by Hannibal Johnson or Fire in Beulah by Rilla Askew, and just other articles and books with abundant with articles about it and pictures to get myself more familiar with the subject. While I was reading Black Wall Street by Hannibal Johnson, I had this idea to integrate a narrator into the film, and there are excerpts of Black Wall Street that I thought were not only full of content that were relevant to the riot, but also they were also very literarily embellished, I guess. So I picked out certain passages that I felt could encompass major points in the riot. And so when I interviewed Hannibal Johnson, I asked him to read excerpts of his book and then integrated those into the film.